local preaching is that I never preached a sermon about widowhood. Never taught a class about widowhood. Never even thought about it until my wife died. And I thought about now in reflection how much benefit that I could have derived and maybe other people could have derived from having addressed a subject that is perceived to be negative. As a matter of fact, in school you may have been told you had to read the Scarlet Letter, okay? The Scarlet Letter. Well, how about the Black W? That's what I call widowhood. It's the Black W. It's not viewed as a positive and pleasant subject because it's a difficult time in life. Let me begin by giving you some insight into what it's like. H. Norman Wright said the loss of our spouses changes our entire lives. It shifts the foundation of our existence. Nothing is as it was. Even the familiar becomes unfamiliar. Every aspect of our lives is disrupted without our partner. Everything has to be relearned, just as a flooded river does when it recedes and leaves behind a maze of new streams. In a culture that doesn't like to acknowledge loss or talk about its impact, grieving is difficult. And when we add this silence to the fact that most of us have never been taught about the process and normalcy of grief, no wonder we struggle. Prior to the death of your spouse, your life is going in a well-established direction. You had an identity. You could say who you were. This has changed. You're not exactly who you were. The person that you lost was a part of your identity. You were someone's spouse, someone's partner. You continue to be that person in your heart and memory, but there's a vacant place where your loved one stood. Another author said, when I lost my husband Roy, it was as if I entered into another universe. I wasn't only grief-stricken, I was disoriented, terrified, and completely at a loss as to what I was supposed to do next. Although I wasn't on any medication, I felt like I was in a coma. I could hear what was going on. My body was present, but my mind was elsewhere. A sister in Columbia, Tennessee, sent me this. When my husband and I left for the Nashville hospital that cold, snowy February day, we, of course, did not know he would remain there for 32 days and not come home. As his health problems worsened, we had opportunity to discuss our final parting and say goodbye. For this, I am very thankful, as well as for the fact that he was a faithful Christian. He reminded me God's will was being done. He made me promise to go on and enjoy life, a promise hard to keep. All during the roller coaster hospital stay, I focused on him and his needs. However, when he was gone, it hit me like a ton of bricks. It was now about me. I was numb, in shock, filled with unanswered questions, and felt like I had been cut in half. For the first time ever, I lived alone. I dreaded the leaving of the house. Eventually, I pushed myself out to the grocery store as I needed to eat, even though I had no little appetite at all. It felt like I was going into enemy territory that no one would protect me in. What if I had a flat tire, or even worse, a wreck? He was no longer there to care for me. An older couple that I was acquainted with was shopping the same day at the same store, and this was my first trip to the grocery. She said, "Why are you shopping? You don't have a husband to cook for." Remember dumb things caring people say? I ignored her and rushed away before she saw my tears. I forgave her, but it took a while. She was very old, and I know she did not realize the impact of what she said. So many do not think before they speak. Later, she said, I felt disabled, vulnerable, incomplete. I felt like an open wound on which someone was pouring salt. Kathy Eagleston lives in the Titusville, Florida area, and she sent me this text that she permits me now to send or say or read publicly now. I was told by my family, and she's in her 50s at this time, I was told by my family, a family member that loves me, that time will heal. I don't think that is at all possible. 33 years of my life with my husband, sharing 3 children together, was my whole world. I just can't see past today, and the pain is too much. 8 years ago, another person said, I married my best friend. 8 years ago, I never imagined my life would be the way it is now. I never dreamed that until death do us part, of our vows would be a part of my reality so quickly. A widow in Arkansas said, I wasn't a person anymore. Couples turned their backs on me. A brother in the Lord said, I don't know what's going on. Today, I just can't stop crying. I'm just so lonesome. But when people are around, I just want them to leave so I can cry. Another lady said, I miss him so much. Knowing that he is in heaven does not stop the pain and the loneliness for the one left behind. Another, we did everything together. We were married for 48 and a half years when a tiny germ, COVID, took his life. I'm struggling with extreme loneliness. The house is so quiet and no longer alive with joy. I could go on and read for an hour those kinds of things that were shared with me by other people. It has a powerful impact in your life. How many people now married have any idea what it's going to be like for one of the two of them when one of them dies? I was clueless. What's really weird about my situation is I had studied some about grief and I had taught grief classes. But when it happened to me, it was a tremendous personal struggle. I want to share with you about the person I call my favorite widow. No offense to any widow other than her. Her name is Millie. I was preaching in a gospel meeting at the Grosbeck Church of Christ on the north side of Cincinnati, Ohio. And the preacher came to me and said, Dean, I've got this 90-plus-year-old woman who wants to take you out to eat. I'd never been on a date with a 90-plus-year-old woman, but I knew not to say no. I said, Mark, go ahead and set it up. So during that gospel meeting week, she took me out to a Japanese restaurant, which I thought was kind of funny because I didn't know 90-plus-year-old women had dates in Japanese restaurants with widowed men. So anyway, we went to the restaurant and the waiter came, and then when the waiter left, I turned to Millie and I said, Millie, tell me about your life. Tell me your story. And so she proceeds to tell me about this guy that she was married to for 63 years. And she told me about their life together. She told me about what a great father he was. She told me about their marriage together, but about his diagnosis, and then about her caregiving, and then about his dying. And then she dropped a conversational bomb. But that wasn't my first husband. And I was shocked. And I said, well, Millie, tell me about your first husband. She said, well, I was 19 years old. We were married. We already had one child, about a year old. And I was pregnant with our second child. And my husband was in General Patton's army in the Battle of the Bulge. And he died there. She said, I had him buried in France. Quote, I remember exactly what she said after that. A decision that to this day I regret, unquote. In my office, I have an 8.5 by 11 white sheet that has a picture of Ray Farmer's grave marker in France that was given to me by a guy in a church in the Richmond, Virginia area who is big into genealogy and the study of such things. And he has this program where he can locate these markers all over the world. Now, I want you to stop and think about Millie's life when she's 19 years old, and this is the mid-1940s. So how does a 19-year-old girl who is pregnant, who already has a 1-year-old child, how does that woman survive in the mid-1940s? It was about 4 years later that she married this other guy that was her husband for 63 years. And so after I heard her story, that's when I became impressed with the value of people's loss stories and how inspirational they can be. Because when I left Millie in the Cincinnati, Ohio area that week, here's what I would say to myself sometimes. If Millie could do this, I can do this. And I'm in a whole lot better place than Millie was at age 19 in the mid-1940s. Have you ever thought about your story of struggle can be somebody else's inspiration to make it through their storm with your help? What are the risk factors of becoming widowed? Well, the first one is getting hitched. Now, we have people, adults, who have never married in the United States. And there's nothing wrong with that. There is no great virtue to being married more than being unmarried, or for that matter, being widowed. But the reality is, most of us choose to marry. We live in a coupled world. That's why that lady said, that I quoted from, couples ignored me. Widowed people are misfits in a coupled world, socially, misfits in a coupled world. Remember the Christmas, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer cartoon TV version? What was the name of the island? The island of misfit toys. Okay. The vast majority of adults are married. There are about 15 million widows and widowers in the United States of America, but that dwarfs the number of the population who are married. The vast majority of adults are married. And having been married and then having lost that blessing and those experiences with that precious other person is a struggle different from having never been married. Imagine the difference between being born blind and then going blind because of some disease, let's say at age 20 or 60. See, the one never had the blessing, the other had the blessing and lost it. Dealing with what I call social awkwardness in public for widowed folks is a big challenge. As a matter of fact, the first widowed fellowship I ever hosted was about 4 or 5 months after my wife passed away in Hartville, Ohio. And after we had a great meal together, and I said, okay, I'd like for us to talk about awkwardness in widowhood. As soon as I said that, I had laser-focused eye contact like I seldom get any other time in public speaking. I knew I'd hit a nerve. It is a very awkward thing socially after you've lost your spouse. Not everybody stays married. Some people experience the loss of their marriage, that precious blessing, by divorce. And don't be jumping to the conclusion everybody who has divorce in their story chose it, because that's not the case. But if you're the one that keeps living, then you're the one that's going to be widowed. Now here's what I want you to do. Rattle off for me. Again, I'm going to use the number 5. Rattle off to me 5 things in this culture we presently live in that when we think about widowhood, we typically associate with widowhood. Name me 5 things that we typically associate with widowhood now in our culture. Go. Somebody get us started. Yeah, age. Yeah. But did you notice when we had the pictures of the widowed people, did you notice there were young people there? Because when you say I do, you automatically volunteer to be a part of a club. Prospective widowed people. I had no idea when I was 19, when I said I do, that I was joining a club of prospective widowed people. I mean, after all, the statistics were actually for me, not against me. Because I'm supposed to go first. The vast majority of cases, men die before women. By the way, there are far more widowed females than there are widowed males for two reasons. Number one, the lifespan of a woman is longer than the lifespan of a man. Now, the only explanation I have for that is, guys, we take care of women so good, they live longer than us. That's the only possible explanation I have for that. But it is a scientific fact. Statistics say the lifespan of a woman is longer than the lifespan of a man. Now, combine that with a second thing that's totally the fault of the female gender. Statistically, now there are exceptions, because I met one this morning. Typically, women marry men who are older than they are. Now, that's totally on the women. Women, more often than not, marry men who are older than they are. So if the lifespan of a man is longer than the lifespan of a woman is longer than the lifespan of a man, and a woman marries a man who's older than she is, then you're going to have 4 or 5 times more widowed females than you have widowed males. So age can factor into it, but the fact is, not just old people suffer the loss of their spouse by death. There are a lot of young people. Some of the most inspirational people I've met since I started this ministry with my family are young men and women who have lost their spouses in their 20s and 30s and early 40s. Let's assume for a minute I buy a bus, I give you all a paintbrush, and we paint it just like the Partridge Family bus. Are you old enough to remember that? Partridge Family bus? And we're going to go on a tour. Let's take a trip and let's just go around to a few places. We can go down, for instance, to southern Georgia. We can meet Buffy. Buffy is a young lady who works at a faith-based school. She's a teacher. And every day she talks to her husband on the phone at lunchtime. This particular conversation, it ended and she was concerned. She decided to immediately go to the car and go home. It was a 45-minute commute, though, to go home. On the way home, she calls her father, who's a law enforcement officer, and says, "Dad, I'd like for you to go to the house. I'm concerned about him." He gets to the house first, the father does. Buffy's husband has committed suicide. And they had about a 2 or 3-year-old boy. I could take you over to Cynthia in West Tennessee, and we could travel over there on the bus, and I could introduce you to her. She was inside. Her husband decides to go out. They're farmers. They're big cotton farmers. And he goes out to the barn to do some welding on a truck that has a diesel tank on the back. And the diesel tank has diesel fuel in it. About 75% diesel fuel, 25% fumes, which is not a problem. But what he didn't know was there's a pinhole leak in that tank. So when he cranks up the welder, it blows his body out of the building. She goes and she soaks a bunch of comforters and all kinds of bedding material in the bathtub, runs out and throws them on her husband's body. He is life-flighted to Memphis, and he dies a few days later. They've got 3 kids, and the cotton crop is white in the field. Boy, those Crockett County farmers, I was so impressed, because they rushed to her aid, and here she was in her early 30s. I could take you over to East Tennessee, and I could introduce you to Carla. Carla's husband was substituting for his father because his father was a preacher. And so he's headed to this church, and he's going to preach to substitute for his father. He puts the Bible on his motorcycle, and he heads off to church. And a boy in a truck, a teenage boy in a truck, runs over Carla's husband. And he dies. And she's got 3 kids at home. And she's widowed. And she's in her 40s. There are people who get diseases early in life. There are accidents that happen. And there are suicides that occur. There's all kinds of things that can happen. And it's not something solely experienced by old people. That's why it's really important, I think, for people who are married to understand a little bit about widowhood as they're living in that marriage relationship, because one of the two of them are going to end up with this challenge. Okay, you need 4 more. I asked you for 1. Give me 4 other things that we associate with widowhood in our culture, besides age. Loneliness. It's probably the number 1 thing that widowed people struggle with mightily. Kathy Lee Gifford was married for 29 years to Frank Gifford. He died in 2015. It was their second marriage, by the way. She was remember, NBC morning show personality? Okay. And he died. And whenever she was interviewed by AARP magazine, she said, in regard to her struggle after Frank's death, she said she was experiencing crippling loneliness. She didn't say she was lonely. She said she was experiencing crippling loneliness. Now, she decided to move from the New York City area, the Big Apple, to Podunk Holler, Franklin, Tennessee, outside of Nashville, Williamson County. And she was asked by the Tennessean, the media in Middle Tennessee, why did you move from the Big Apple to Franklin, Tennessee? Here's what she said, quote, I moved here because I was dying of loneliness. She didn't say she was lonely. She said she was dying of loneliness. This is, without question, from all the people I've met and all the research I've done, this is the biggest challenge for people who are burdened with widowhood. It's the loneliness. When you have that couple experience and you're living life with that precious word together, and then you lose that together, it is a brutal, forced change in your life. I had no idea, and I repent as a local preacher for so many years. I feel like I need to go to every widowed person that I have ever had in my presence and apologize to them for the fact I didn't minister to them as I could have because I didn't understand what they were going through. Loneliness. So there's 2, you got 3 more. Can you think of another one? Fear. What am I going to do now? I don't have life with somebody else. There is no together. The we, okay, the W, got turned upside down. Now it's me. And me living life is way different than living life together with somebody who loves you and somebody you love. Can you give me another one? Something else you would relate to widowhood. Okay, I'll give you off the hook. I'm going to run through a bunch of different things here and talk about only a few. But because of time constraints, because I'm determined to make sure you get out of here at noon, I want to make sure that you get a big picture. Now, this list started with about 10, 12 things. It's grown significantly because of other people and additional research that I've done. Now, can you imagine somebody dying that you've been married to and you experiencing relief instead of grief? Why would that be? How could that possibly be? That's your husband, that's your wife, but you feel a sense of relief? Why would that be? Okay. Pam says, if they were suffering for such a long time, and you know that they were a Christian, and you know that now they're no longer at home in the body, they're actually with the Lord. That's a move up in the world, right? And so you could feel, and also you're no longer a caregiver dealing with all that pressure. And there can be relief. Now, what if you're experiencing relief, though, when you should be experiencing in your brain, you should be experiencing grief? How do you feel about that? If you're feeling relief when you should be feeling grief, what's that going to make you feel like? You're guilty. Yeah, you're guilty. So see the confusion, the mental, emotional confusion? Sir, you were going to mention something earlier. Okay. We must be brothers from the same mother because I have that same problem. But there can be times that what if the spouse who died was the reason why you lived in domestic violence? See the relief that could come? You're no longer going to experience that. And there can be relief as well as grief. It can be mixed together. And that can be confusing and maybe even make you feel guilty. Now, what do we say when we tear up or start crying in the presence of somebody else? Go ahead and say it. I'm sorry. What do we have to apologize for? Absolutely nothing. God gave us the ability to cry for a reason. It's kind of like letting pressure out of a pressure cooker. Or it's like letting the air out of a balloon that just keeps getting more and more air in it. And if you keep putting that air in the balloon, it's going to pop. And crying up, tearing, can be a very good thing. You know where some of the biggest crocodile tears and the saltiest tears are cried? Right where we are. In church. Why would that be? Where am I going to sit? And how many widowed people sit alone? We met in 2020, we met a couple in Mission, Texas, way down the tip of Texas. Young couple, graduates of Harding University, who said that, and this was before the workshop ever started, they developed this ministry, where they come in Sunday morning for church and they stalk the widowed. I say stalk. What they're looking for is they're looking for a widowed person who's sitting alone. And this young couple, they go to this widowed person and they say, could we sit with you today? Can you imagine the positive effect of that for a young couple to come and ask to be able to sit with a widowed person? Now, I've already checked about this church. This is the church of assigned seating. You're just like all other churches. You know, everybody has their seat. It's like they've carved it into the side of the pew. Okay? So I realize that this is going to really cause maybe some angst with some people, but stop and think about what a good ministry that would be. To have a couple people always being looking for widowed people who are sitting alone, and then going and asking for permission to sit with them. Now, some people can't cry. Physiologically, they can't cry. And that's okay too. So if you're supposed to be crying but you're not crying, and then you're crying all the time, even in the presence of other people, see, you just have this, you're just at odds with yourself internally. Mentally and emotionally, you just really struggle with some of these things that are very troubling for you. And you just got to keep living with this issue until you learn how to cope with the issue. The heartache is because you've never lost this blessing before. Even if you've been widowed before, you never lost this blessing. Every individual is different. Every married couple is different. And this is the only time that this person has lost this marriage. We need to keep that in mind. It's unique. That loss is very unique. You're going to start asking questions you've never asked before. You're going to wonder about things that you've never wondered about before, and some of them may be faith-centered. That's where this why question that we dealt with in the previous session comes up. There's a lot of faith struggle that we can have, and it's okay to admit the fact that you're struggling with your faith. You know, imagine the effect of somebody responding to the invitation on a Sunday morning and basically just saying, I am really struggling with my faith. I'm just not sure about a lot of things I thought I used to be sure about. And admitting to the whole church family that they're struggling with their faith. That is nothing to be embarrassed about. But that is something to share publicly with other people who can help you with that faith struggle. God gave us the people in our lives for a reason. Remember, life is about people, relationships, and experiences. People, relationships, and experiences. We need to let people in our life. We need to have people that we can trust. And how are we ever going to get the help we need if they don't even know that we're struggling? How many people tomorrow morning, if the Lord permits, will be in our presence who are struggling with their faith and nobody else knows in the room that they're struggling with their faith? But struggling with your faith can be a good thing, because that's often how your faith gets stronger. you get challenged. You begin to search for answers that you thought you had, but now you wonder about. So the faith struggle can actually be turned into a blessing if you put forth the effort to address the issue. The loneliness, as I mentioned, is off the chart. Sometimes when people lose their spouse, they lose their identity because they permitted their marital status to be their identity. I am a widower, but a widower is not who I am. I am a senior citizen, that's obvious, but a senior citizen is not who I am. A cancer patient could say, I'm a cancer patient, but a cancer patient is not who I am. See, all those things that I just mentioned are temporary things. Even something as valuable as a marital status. I'm somebody's wife, I'm somebody's husband. Over time, that's what happens. That becomes such a precious blessing. We become so attached, and we become so dependent on one another, and we roll in life together. And boy, to have that yanked away from you, to have that just pulled away from you, it's a brutal experience. And you can feel as if now, who am I now? Well, that's something that we need to realize. By the way, identity, our personal identity has nothing to do with anything in this life. Our personal identity is our relationship with the Lord. That's an eternal, never-changing thing. Who are you? You are a human being who exists in the image of God and after His likeness. If you're a Christian, you are a child of God. That is your identity. I'm a preacher, but a preacher is not who I am. Don't let things that are temporary become your identity, because you're going to lose the temporary things. Remember, your identity is your connection, your relationship with the Lord. There can be financial jeopardy. The U.S. Census Bureau has done studies about elderly women. Now, they didn't identify the numbers that they associate as elderly women, okay? But here's the way it was phrased in what I read. Elderly women who are widowed are 3 to 4 times more likely to live in poverty than elderly women who are married. Now, that's with a Social Security system that we have misperceived as the perfect safety net for all widowed people, when actually the Social Security system can be quite problematic after the death of your spouse. I know that from experience, and other people could tell you the same. Even in the church, we can have brothers or sisters who find themselves in jeopardy, financial jeopardy, when they're widowed. I don't think I've shared this anywhere else, but I'll go ahead and share it here. When my wife passed away, it was after 8.5 years of decline from Parkinson's disease. During that time when she was handicapped with that disease, I always thought, with handicapped people in a family, that would be a real challenge, and it would be stressful and at times exhausting. And I was experiencing all of that. What I had no idea about was the financial effect of having a handicapped person in your family. Because that 8.5 years nearly drained all of our savings. And that's why I had to frantically search for some place to let me preach for 5 years to get back up on my feet financially. It can be a real blow to a person financially. What you're dealing with is forced change, and that makes us mad. Because we are citizens of the United States of America, and we prize our freedom, and we're proud of our freedom, and we exercise our freedom, and life has forced us to deal with something we don't want to deal with, and that creates a lot of mental and emotional stress. Now you're having to deal with the absence of the person. When you look where the person sat at home, what do you see? Air. Dealing with that absence is a huge struggle. Dreams are not an uncommon thing. Just a few days ago, I talked to a woman who said that she had a visit from her late husband in a dream, and she said it was sweet. That's not an uncommon thing. Years and years and years. It was just a few months ago I had a dream, and Christmas Day was 12 years from me when my wife died. So it's been over 10 years, and I have still had dreams about my wife. It doesn't mean that you're not grieving properly. It doesn't mean you're going crazy. What happens when you go to sleep in regard to your brain? Now, when you're awake, do you have total control over your brain? Do you always totally control your brain when you're awake? Well, you'd like to think, but you don't, do you? Your brain, it's hard to control your brain when you're awake. When you're asleep, how much control do you have over your brain? It's going to go anywhere it wants to. And why shouldn't it go to somebody who has become deeply ingrained in your life for possibly years? So this is not something to be concerned about, but it is something that's very typical. The silence is deafening. A widowed person no longer says, "Would you please be quiet? I'm on the phone right now." Or a widowed person never asks, "What are you doing over there? You're making so much noise." Do you know some widowed people get up in the morning and they turn their TV on and never turn it off until they go to bed? Not because they watch TV all the time. It's the sound. The silence can be deafening to some people after loss. The emptiness you feel is because that other person helped to fill up your life. And now you're dealing with an emptiness you've never felt before. And now you have a dependence that you've never experienced before. See, before you were a team. The team no longer exists. Now it's just you. And so you have to recognize that and accept the help of others. Because you're in, remember, at times, the intensive care phase of your life. The loss of your spouse causes stress that is different because marriage is different. What blessing in your life, this side of eternity, is better than marriage? And you're dealing with the stress of having lost that relationship. And the anger, let's be angry here for a minute. Who would you like to be angry at? You've lost your spouse, or you could say you lost your son or daughter, whatever. Okay, let's say you've lost your spouse. Let's be angry at somebody. Name me somebody I can be angry at. With them, they've died, and you're mad at them? Yep, that's pretty common. This lady in Titusville, Florida, that Cheryl Wayne and I know, admitted that there were times when she took a shower, she would beat the side wall of the shower, saying, "Why did you leave me? Why did you leave me?" You think she was going crazy? Well, she was a little strange. She's unique, okay? She wasn't going crazy. She was grieving. She was venting. She was mad. You know, that's what we need to do when we're angry at somebody. We need to go to them, okay? And that was her way of venting. She was mad at her husband. And that's not crazy. I'm not sure I would say it's typical, but it's something that does happen. So, okay, you can be crazy at your husband. Who else would you like to be crazy at? God, the giver of every good and perfect gift. James 1:17. And now you want to be mad at God. If you're mad at God, where should you go? Shouldn't you go to God? Just like if you're mad with somebody, if you're angry with somebody, you go to them. That's how relationships get stronger, is when you deal with these challenges and you open up and you become vulnerable and you express to them the struggle that you're having. You know, whenever you've lost your spouse, it's no time to be no longer worshiping. It's the time to be at worship more frequently maybe than you've ever been before. We're going to talk about that very thing in the sermon study tomorrow about praise the Lord no matter what. Well, you know, we need to spend more time in study because that's how he talks to us. We need to spend more time in prayer because that's how we talk to him. And we need to praise him because that's how we grow our dependence upon him. But yeah, people can be mad at God. And, you know, sometimes people, when they're mad at God, they say stuff that is inconsistent with reality makes you feel uncomfortable, but I would discourage you from shutting them down. Have you ever thought about in the book of Job, all those crazy things that were said, and God never shut them down? Until after he let them vent, those three friends and even Job himself and Elihu, God let all that go on, and then he comes in and says, okay, Job, sit down. I've got some questions to ask you. You know, I think it's good to just let people vent their anger first, and then you begin to deal with it. Okay, so we can be angry with the person who died. We can be angry with God. Who else could we be angry with? With ourselves. Is there a perfect caregiver? If that's not the issue, how about this one? Benita calls me. She's in Fort Scott, Kansas, and she's killed her husband. She got COVID. She gave COVID to her husband. She survived and he died. So she killed her husband. By the way, she's remarried now. Has a great husband. She's doing fantastic. But boy, she really struggled because she felt like she had given her husband the COVID, and because of that, he died, so she killed her husband. See how weird this is sometimes, dealing with all these issues that we deal with? Well, for the sake of time, let's move on. The worry and the fears that you have, again, are very natural and normal because your life's been blown up. It's not going to be the same. You've lost a precious blessing in your life, and you're tossing and you're turning because this is just not normal for you. Now, Chester, West Virginia was the first place I ever tried to do anything along this line. And it was only just a couple Sundays where the eldership let me come over and preach and teach class. So I was dealing with this kind of an issue, and this list was real short then. And he came up to me after this session, and he said, Dean, I've got something I want you to add to the list. I would guess him to be in his early 80s. He was bald-headed. He had glasses about as thick as that old Coke glass bottle. And I could see his eyes starting to tear up. And he said, I've got something I'd suggest that you add to the list. And he said, suicidal thoughts. I was shocked. I hadn't thought about that before. But that is way more common than you'd like to think. Again, going back to us assembling together with our church family, I think we would all be shocked to find out about fellow worshipers with us who that week or that month, they have been through something so bad that they have thought about committing suicide. There are way too many suicides. There are way, way too many suicidal thoughts. And that's why there are a lot of suicides. Wouldn't it be better if we were more transparent and let other people know that we were struggling, that we were in this intensive care phase of our life? Why is this so difficult? The loss of your spouse, why is it so difficult? This is the only human relationship described with that two-word phrase. The only one. The parent-child relationship, the child-parent relationship, the sibling relationship. No, only the husband-wife relationship is described this way. It is such a unique relationship. And when you do it right, and this is how you do it right, this is how you take two flawed people and you create a magnificent marriage. Now, you can't have a perfect marriage because you've got two imperfect people. Those are the only kind of people that get married, are imperfect people. You can take two imperfect, flawed people, and you can make something that's magnificent when they both invest totally in the philosophy of the total giving, of the total self for a total lifetime. Model that to your children, to your grandchildren. Teach that to your children and your grandchildren. And let's have more magnificent marriages that really effectively display the glory of God and the depth of His wisdom when He gave us the opportunity to live life in a broken world married. And it's so unique. Don't ever go to a widowed person and say, I know how you feel. They might slap you in their head. They might slap you physically. But that's probably the most offensive thing I think we can say. I know how you feel. No, you don't. You can't. How could you? How could you possibly know? Have you been living in my skin? Have you been in my marriage? Do you have my personality? Do you have my faith, my lack of faith, or my depth of faith? The reality. And what about, it's different. What if you lost a husband after 5 months of marriage, which I could introduce you to her? And then the person who lost their mate after 75 years of marriage, which I could introduce you to people like that too. There's a big difference. And some families and some couples are very open and talk about a lot of stuff. Some are so closed-lipped and they're private to a fault. Just things are so different. It's very unique. The struggle of people is very unique. Cheryl Wayne is going to give a gift to every widowed person sitting in this room. Now, let me explain to you what a widowed person is. A widowed person is not a person who's lost their spouse and married again. When you go to the doctor, you check married now. So you don't get a gift. This is exclusively to people who are sitting in this room who have been married but lost their spouse and have not remarried. Okay? As Cheryl Wayne's going to make his way around. Raise your hand, please, if you are one of these people, and let me have one of those. This is a gift we wanted to give to you. Okay? Now, let me explain to you why you're getting this gift. It's not so you can use it to eat and then lose weight because of that, okay? Granted, it's small, okay? Now, here's what I'm giving you this gift for. I want to suggest that you take this home and lay it somewhere where you see it every day. Again, not to use it to eat, but here's what I want you to think about. This is a fork in the road, right? This image you see, it's a fork in the road. When you have first lost your spouse or experienced any other serious loss, it is like sitting in front of a slammed shut, locked door. And you just stare in it in disbelief. I can't believe I'm dealing with this. That's deep grief, and everybody needs to experience deep grief before they can move forward in their life with their loss and learn to live with their loss. So the deep grief is a period of great benefit, but very painful and hard to appreciate when you're in it. But at some point in your grief journey after that, what you need to realize is in your life, you've come to a fork in the road, and you have to decide what are you going to do with the rest of your life. Have you ever thought about when you pick up a fork, you've decided to eat? You've also, in the process, you're going to decide what you're not going to eat. You're going to decide what you are going to eat. You're going to decide how much you're going to eat. You're going to decide when you're going to quit eating. Let this represent decisions. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? You are not dead. Somebody else died. You are not dead. There are 3 mottos of the Widowhood Workshop Ministry. One of them is, don't die until you're dead. A hard thing to live consistent with. It is easy to die when somebody else dies. But the reality is, you didn't die. So what are you going to do with the rest of your life? When one door of happiness closes, often God opens another one. But we often look so long at the closed door that we don't see the one that's been opened for us. We can't forever, as therapeutic as it is, sitting in front of the slam shut, locked door, we can't forever sit there and have value to God. That's therapy, though. But we also need to realize at some point in our grief journey, we've got to start getting our ducks in a row. And the first thing you do is you got to go duck hunting, because they're all over the place. Then you got to get them in a row. What are you going to do with the rest of your life? You have purpose because you have a pulse. Your late husband or wife has no pulse. they're in glory. God can grant you the grace until you get to glory. But you've got to accept the grace and the strength it provides to move forward in your life. What you choose to do is your choice. I chose to start this ministry, and my family joined in with me because we wanted to help people who suffered great loss in their life. And that was my choice. You know, it would be hard for me to go back to local preaching at that point in my life. I was 61 years old. 61-year-old preachers in the Lord's church are not flying off the shelf. You know, when you're aging, it's kind of hard to get a local preaching job. And then secondly, what church was going to take me as a local preacher, because I don't have a wife. And let's be honest about it, churches typically want twofers, two for the price of one, a husband and a wife. Sometimes the guy gets the job not because so much of him, but they're so impressed with his wife. I know that for a fact because churches have told me that. But hopefully they were able to tolerate the preacher. And so I had a strike three against me. I was a Yankee looking for a job in the southeast part of the country because that's where my children and grandchildren lived. And so thankfully there was a little church in West Tennessee that was a broken church that took me in for 5 years and helped me to recover before we could get in full time into this ministry in March of 2020. And by the way, I accept, you know, COVID, that whole nightmare. You're looking at the person to blame. My last day of local preaching was March 1, 2020. The whole world crashed and burned when I left local work. Must have been me. I'll accept that if somebody needs the blame and other people won't accept the blame. But that's the reality. We need to move forward, but we can't do that unless we accept the fact we move forward with our loss. You don't delete it out of your life. You can't do that. You move forward with your loss. I'm a widower until I marry again or I die. But my marital status is not my identity. I want to introduce you to a book. It's 12 noon, you're allowed to leave. There's a fellow named Paul Sane, who's a preacher. This month, I believe, he turns 80 years old. About 90 days ago, he lost his wife to Alzheimer's. But prior to that, he lost his wife to Alzheimer's. He lost his wife twice. Once to the disease, and then once to death. The death occurred about some 90 days ago. While she was struggling with Alzheimer's and while he was struggling as a caregiver to them, he wrote a book. He wrote notes in the long nights when he had a hard time getting her to bed and struggling. This book is entitled Our Journey Down Alzheimer's Lane. And I would encourage you to go to Sane Publications and take a look at this book. I'm not selling the book, but tomorrow I am going to give one of these books away to some person who wins what I call the holy lottery, okay? But I'm going to give one of these books away. He gave me some books, and I told him, I'm not going to make any money on your books, but I will give your books away to people who would appreciate them. But think about this. If you would be interested in reading about the struggle of dealing with Alzheimer's, then tomorrow we'll give you an opportunity to become more familiar with this book. If you'd like to see this book and just thumb through it, I have a couple of them here on the table. You can feel free to look at it. You can order them directly from Sane Publications, S-A-I-N Publications. He is in Pulaski, Tennessee. He preaches for a church in Rogersville, Alabama. I hope it's been of some benefit to you. This 3 hours, you'll never get back again. So I hope it's been of value to you. That's the way I look at it. And I thank you for coming. Let's pray together, please. Father, thank you for this time together. We know that time is valuable, and we know that time is something that's a blessing you give to us. And we also know that the time that we have here in this world is temporary. But Father, we also know there is an eternity. Father, help us to remember that everyone, every single one, will be somewhere forever. Help us to make sure that we embrace your grace and reflect your holiness in our life by submitting to your will so that we can spend an eternity with you. Thank you for the identity that is eternal, you and our relationship with you. Thank you for everyone who's come out. Give us safety, Father, throughout this day. We pray for the opportunity to be together tomorrow to